Welcome everyone to our third episode of this journey where we've been looking at Divine Continuum. It's good to have you here. And in the last episode, we began defining the purpose of God, and we explored the two extremes that we Christians have been living in for a long time, and where we identified them as one extreme that is where we find that people oscillate between the Martyr Syndrome and, on the other side, the bless me syndrome. And then we defined the purpose of God, where we said that we say two things about the purpose of God. One, we talked about the original intent or the original purpose of God that He had in mind before the foundation, or rather before the fall, and then the restorative purpose of God, and we defined what those two things are. We saw that every generation is designed to restore a specific part of God's purpose. And then we discovered why Jesus is being held in heaven, and any premature call for his return is nothing but just a hoax. And finally, we issued a call to shift from being passive spectators and to go to being active participants in the divine continuum. So tonight, we are going to build on that, and we're going to learn how to find balance between the two extremes. And if time allows us, we're going to look at how the shift occurs when the baton is being passed to the next generation, and probably go even into how you can effectively pass the baton, and what are the indicators when a baton has been passed to the next generation. The goal or the reason why we're looking at these things is because we want us as believers to be equipped to live an integrated life that is not having compartments, or it is not having dichotomy, and so that we can live our daily existence that is connected to the purpose of God. And eventually we can gain wisdom to build a legacy that is going to outlive us, that is going to help us to live a successful life, and we can be able to pass the baton to the next generation. Now, for today, I really want to start by looking at the two extremes and how we can be able to fuse them, or rather come to the center. We move away from the extremes and we come to the center, and or we avoid being in either of the extremes, so that we can be able to work on or be a part of the divine continuum and be a part of it effectively. Now, we said that the God's macro purposes, they are restorative. I think that is very clear. God is a restorative God. He's a redemptive God. He's always restoring something. And therefore, if that then is his goal, if that is his purpose, to come to a place where he restores all things, then it is important that we also participate in the process of restoration. Because remember, God is not going to use any other being. He's going to use us in the process of restoration. Therefore, we must participate in it. And therefore, the answer in fusing the both extremes into one, or to bring it to the center, is to understand that our personal lives must be fused with the purposes of God, so that we stop focusing so much on the purpose of God on one end, and or being so much consumed with our own lives on the other end. And therefore, it is important to do that. And today, I want to address those two extremes. The first one is I want to talk about is for those who are focused on the macro purposes of God, where the macro purpose of God produces Martyr Syndrome. I think that is what we said. It produces Martyr Syndrome, where you feel nice when you're suffering for the gospel. And in most cases, what usually happens when somebody overcommits or is so much committed into something, it is their families that suffer. Their families suffer, they don't see you, you are absent, and therefore you find that your family is getting lost, your children are getting lost, because you are so much committed into what is happening out there. You forget that the purpose of God has to do with your family, and therefore the imbalance comes from viewing your primary God-given responsibility as a distraction. That is where the imbalance comes from. Remember, I'm talking about the people who are so much committed or focused on the macro purposes of God. And we said the word macro means large scale. There are people who are only concerned about the purposes of God that are only out there and go out there, do go and preach the gospel, or be so concerned about the gospel of Jesus Christ, but it brings an imbalance in your life so that your family is the one that actually suffers. And therefore, that imbalance is usually brought about because of viewing your primary God-given responsibility, and that is your family. You view it as a distraction. So you often consider, going out there for ministry as more spiritually significant than your family, and that is an imbalance. And therefore, we want to find out, how then do you find balance? How do you find balance if you are that kind of a person? One, you got to understand that your primary assignments are not distractions from God's purpose. And what is your primary assignment or your primary responsibility? It is your family. They are not a distraction. In fact, they are foundational expressions of it. They are foundational expressions of the purpose of God. What you're going to do out there, then it has to first of all be expressed within your family, and the practical pathway towards that balance is that you got to recalibrate your perspective. Your perspective must change. You must first see that your first ministry arena is your life and your home. That's your first ministry arena. It is your life and your home. And therefore, that is something that needs to be recalibrated within your head or within your mind. And the question you need to ask yourself is this: is your family spiritually healthier? Is it more loved and more secure because of your service to God? Ask yourself that question. Now that you're so much concerned with what's going out there and you neglect your family, ask yourself this: is your family more healthier spiritually? Is it more loved? Do they feel more loved? Is it more secure because of your service to God? And in most cases, you find that question probably does not have an answer that can please you. So, or do your family, do they feel neglected? Do they feel neglected and actually resentful of the God that you serve because of your absence? Do they feel they don't want, the children, they don't want anything to do with that God of yours because your God takes away their daddy, or your God takes away their mommy. And therefore you find the children becoming resentful of God because of your misrepresentation. And that is not a good thing. And therefore, you need to recalibrate your mind and to start seeing things correctly. The second thing you need to do is reframe your role. Reframe your role. What that means is that you're not just a preacher, you're not just a worker, you are a priest in your own home, meaning your family or your home becomes the first place of ministry, not out there. All right? You're not just a leader out there, you are a leader in your family. And that is something that you need to reframe your role. You need to start seeing it correctly. Okay? For ministers, if you're a minister of the gospel, then ministry, your first ministry is your family. That is your sacred place. Your home is your sacred place. It is more important there than the pulpit. And that's something that needs to be understood. The third thing that you need to do, remember, we are looking at what? How do you bring yourself to the center? The third thing is you need to sanctify the ordinary. That's a phrase that I have just coined up. Sanctify the ordinary, or sanctify the mundane. That which looks ordinary, let it become sanctified. Let it be sacred to you. Because remember, God's original intent started with what? It started with a family, it started with a home, it started with a garden, not a temple. All right? And that was before the fall. And that can tell you where God puts priority. That's where he puts priority in the family. Okay? So you need to ask yourself this question: am I using spiritual activities as an escape escape from the sacred work of ministering to those who are closest to me or to those who are my family? Am you using spiritual activities in order to use as an escape? All right? You're escaping your family, you're escaping your responsibilities. The fourth thing that you need to do is you need to define your non-negotiables. Remember, today we are just looking at practical things. Last week we just looked at purpose, we looked at all those things out there, but we never brought it down to you as an individual. So today I really want us to focus on the practicality of it. Define your non-negotiables. What are your non-negotiable responsibilities? Number one, you need to understand that you are first a husband. You are first a wife before you're a minister out there. Okay, and that's an unnegotiable. You are first a father. You are first a mother before you become anything else out there. Before you become a bishop or whatever it is that you're out there, you are first a father, a husband, a minister, a wife, a mother. That's who you are. Okay, you are first a son to your aging parents. I'm not talking about spiritual sons. You are first a son to your aging parents. If that's you have arrived there, you are first a daughter to your aging parents. And the problem is you find that people neglect their aging parents because they are serving God. They don't understand that their parents are part of your responsibility. And that's why you find that it is easier to give a big fat offering to the church, but you do not even send a coin to your parents in the village or wherever it is that they live. In fact, Paul rebuked some people, some children because of that. In fact, I would like to read that. 1 Timothy chapter 5, a scripture that we usually misquote. We say that it is usually for the men. In fact, I'm going to read that particular portion. 1 Timothy chapter 5, I would like to read from verse 4, sorry. 1 Timothy 5, and I will start to read from verse 4. This is Paul who was talking to Timothy on issues of widows. Okay, people who have had their husbands dead. And therefore, he's talking about them. And this is what he says: honor widows who are really widows. That is verse 3. Verse 4 says, but if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents. Who is being addressed here? Paul is talking about the issues of widows and who have grandchildren, or they have children who are neglecting them. And then he said that this is good and acceptable before God. Now, she who is really a widow and left alone trusts in God and continues his application and prayers night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. And these things command that they may be blameless. Now, listen to the next statement, a scripture we usually use very much. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. We use that scripture for men. That if somebody does not provide for his own family, he's worse than an infidel. He doesn't understand. He's not talking about men. He's talking about children or grandchildren who have neglected their mothers. They have neglected the widows. They have neglected their parents out there in the village. And they come here and they are giving big fat offerings in the church, but they don't send anything to their parents. And he's telling them that if anyone does not provide for his own who? His own widowed mother. If anyone does not do that, he is worse than an infidel. He has denied the faith. That's what Paul is talking about. And then he continues down there. He talks about the do not let a widow who is 60 years old be taken into number and blah, 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 all that stuff. He's talking about about widows in that whole portion. And therefore, we need to stop taking scriptures out of context. We need to read it in context. And therefore, when we talk about being so much engaged in things out there, so that you neglect your responsibilities, this is one of the cases that was going on in the days of Paul. And Paul is addressing it. And therefore, you are first what? A son to your parents. You are what? A daughter to your parents. When was the last time you went to see them? When was the last time that you even spoke to them? When was the last time that you actually sent some money to them? Because remember, they have used their time and their lives to bring you up. Now, here you are, you neglected them, you're living well. And Paul is saying it is acceptable to God when you take care of your own. Number 5, for those who are on that extreme, is that you need to see your family as the first continuum. Your family is the most immediate and tangible continuum you are called to steward by God. That's the way it is. And the goal is not to go out there and launch 1,000 ministries, and therefore, instead of making sure that your sons and your daughters, and I'm not talking about spiritual sons and daughters, please, you go out there, launch 1,000 ministries, and your sons and daughters are going off. Okay? Your first responsibility is to make sure that you have spiritually healthy sons and daughters who can carry the purpose of God farther than you did. That's the goal, all right? Because your children at that point, they become your most important disciples. So when you invest your time, when you invest your love, when you invest discipleship to your children, you're not neglecting God-given purpose. You're not. In fact, you are actually building it. And that's the way it should be. And therefore, legacy a legacy of faithfulness at home is more valuable in the kingdom than a legacy of public ministry that leaves a trail of broken relationships on its wake. Okay? A legacy of faithfulness at home is more valuable in the kingdom than a legacy of public ministry that leaves a trail of broken relationships on its wake. And therefore, for those who are on that extreme, they're just concerned about the purposes of God, they neglect their responsibilities. I hope you will find practical ways to come back to the center so that you can focus first of all on what is the most important thing to you, and not just to you, but to God himself. Because he knows once there is a transfer to your children, then the future purposes of God, they are going to be secure. And apparently you find also the others who only focus on those who they call spiritual sons. They neglect their own blood sons. And that is not the right way. Okay? So to the second group, or to the second people who are on the other end of the extreme, or the other extreme, those who are only focused on themselves, the individuals, those who have just the bless me mentality, or they see God as somebody who is just there to bless them. And these are some practical ways I really want to talk about so that you can now again come to the center. Now let me say this. You are not wrong in desiring to be blessed by God. Let's just be clear about that. We are not trying to say now live in poverty, deny yourself. No. You are not wrong in wanting God's blessing. The error comes in making it the ultimate goal. That is where the error comes in. God has no problem with you having stuff. Okay? The problem is now when it becomes your ultimate goal. And therefore, you must fuse your personal life with, or rather, whatever it is that you want, the blessing that you're looking for, you must be able to come to the center and fuse it with the purposes of God, by understanding that your personal blessing is not the destination. It's actually the fuel for the mission. All right? So how do you make that shift? How do you come to the center? All right? Number one, you need to redefine what the purpose of the blessing. So when God blesses you, what for what? What is it for? What's the purpose of it? When you redefine that, then you start seeing that actually the reason why God blesses you is for a reason. Okay? It is not just for yourself. So your blessing is not just about your personal consumption. It is a tool for shifting people's lives. So it is not just for you. It is a tool that God has given you so that you can shift people's lives. So instead of just playing, God bless me and all that, why can't you start praying like this? That God, how do you want to bless others through me? In other words, you become the hands of God. It is not, the blessing is not coming from you. It is coming from God through you. You get the shift of mentality. That it is not you who is initiating the process. It is coming from God through you to somebody else. And I'm telling you, when that happens, it doesn't leave you dry. All right? So your blessing is linked to your role in the restoration. Because remember, we said the purpose of God is what? It is restoration, or restoration of all things. Now, if then that's the purpose of God, then your participation in it is for you to be a restorer. Just like God is. All right? And in that way, then you participate in his divine purpose or divine continuum. And therefore, you must see yourself as the hands of God to the one that you're blessing or you're shifting their lives. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you need to connect your desires to God's original intent. Remember, we said God's original intent is what? It is to, is to bring things to correct order. All right? Is to bring things to correct order. That was his original intent. And therefore, your bless me desires, they're often distorted echoes of God's original design. So when you desire a blessing, or and you desire to be blessed by God, there is nothing wrong with that. And that's something that you need to understand. However, there needs to be a calibration, a shift, an understanding, a change of mentality, so that you can understand why then does God just bless me? So that you stop just thinking about yourself. You also start thinking about other people. Because if God is blessing other people, then you become the hand of God to bless other people. And therefore, your desire for blessing, nothing wrong with that. Okay? In fact, when somebody desires, for example, a good house, it is really not really a house he's desiring. When somebody desires to own a house, he's not really owning a house that he's really desiring. He's desiring security. He's desiring shalom, peace in his family, where he stops being harassed by the landlords. That's what you're desiring. The real thing is not the house. The real thing is to come to a place of security, stability in your home. That's what you're desiring. So internally, it is not a house you want. It is stability you want. All right. So the house is not the issue. That is just like an emblem. All right. So when somebody desires a happy family, it's not really a happy family you're desiring. No, you're desiring love. You're desiring companionship. You're desiring community. That's what you're desiring. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. So when you desire success in your work, it's not really success you're desiring. What you're desiring is purposeful work. Okay. Right, and everybody, especially when people become workaholics, you deep down is a desire to find purpose, to find significance in what they do, and therefore they bury themselves in work at the detriment of their families. And in most cases, people start pointing fingers in the wrong place. So the place is not really the work they are doing; it is an emptiness within that they are trying to fill. Okay. Is the desire. Where is purpose? They're looking for purpose. And therefore, in fact, now try to think of this way. When somebody already has means, okay, and is still so engaged in work that their families cannot even see him. So what's the problem? So that tells you the issue is not work. It is purpose they are looking for. Because again, you need to understand when God gave Adam something to do, a work to do, he was not doing work for providing himself. For himself, rather. Everything was already provided. Okay? Everything that he needed was already provided. So the work that he was doing was not for provision. No, it was for fulfilling what God wants. It was fulfilling God's intent. That was the purpose of it. Because provision was already there anyway. Okay? And therefore, when somebody is always engaged in work, in real sense, it is that emptiness that he's trying to fill up. And therefore, it is important now to connect that to the God's restorative purpose. So therefore, use me in order to change people's lives or to shift people's lives. Number 3, reframe your prayers. Okay? Reframe your prayers, meaning connect your prayers to God's restorative intent. Now, what do I mean by that? Don't just pray, God, give me a better job. All right? The best way to pray is that, God lead me to a role where I can restore dignity, where I can restore creativity, where I can restore stewardship, and then provide for me in the process. All right? And therefore, it's very, very critical for you now to shift your mentality in that way. So you're not just seeing yourself as somebody who is having a job. No, you're seeing yourself as a person who is using your job in order to bring restoration, in order to bring creativity within the place of work, in order to bring dignity in people's lives, in order to bring stewardship in whatever it is that you do. So some of these things that we usually pray, don't just pray, fix my marriage. No, restore the reflection of the image that marriage was designed for right from the start, and start with me. Okay? So it's not just a matter of restore the marriage, but what was the image? What was the original image of how marriage was supposed to be right from the beginning? That's what you're looking for. That when I look at my marriage and I look at the picture or the image of how marriage was supposed to be, it does not reflect. And therefore, please, God, restore me to that. That's what I'm looking for. So it's not just a matter of being restored for the sake of it. Not just being restored because, to make you happy. No, you are connecting your prayers to God's original intent, and God always responds to that. And therefore, this whole understanding, it shifts our focus from merely getting things to participating in the restoration process. And that restoration process is what we are referring to as God's restorative intent. You connect your personal life, everything that you do every day, to the restorative purpose of God. And therefore, that brings you to the center. Okay? So your prayers shift from being need-based to God's intent, to responding to God's intent. And that becomes a very powerful way. Number 4, You need to see your blessing as a tool for restoration. I know some of these points, they are dovetailing into what I've already said. But the thing is, you need to see your blessing, or it is that your material blessing, that's what I'm talking about, as tools for the restoration. In other words, how can you restore dignity in people? I mean, some of us, we usually have even house girls. Do you restore dignity to them? Because sometimes some of them did not end up in that particular role because they wanted to. It's because of just of vagaries of life. Okay, and how can you restore dignity to her now that she is in your house? Okay, how can you restore that? Because when you do that, you are participating in God's restorative process. Maybe you have gone through a particular thing, a particular problem, and you've come out on the other end. Therefore, your testimony is not just about a testimony. No, you are using it to help somebody else who is struggling with the same thing, to help them, to restore them. You are an addict, but you have overcome addiction. Why don't you go and help those who also are in the same mess? Why don't you restore them or bring them into God's original intent? Because that was the purpose of why God got you out in the first place. The book of Luke chapter 22 and verse 31, this was Jesus who was talking to Peter, and he was saying that he was telling him that Satan has desired to sift him like wheat. But Jesus tells him, I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. But when you come out, strengthen your brethren. In other words, when you have gone through an experience, it is not just for you. There are others who will be sifted. Why don't you go and strengthen them? Why don't you go and encourage them? Why don't you go and restore them? And that becomes now your experience, your testimony becomes now, you connect it to the restorative purposes of God. And that becomes a very powerful thing. When it comes to your gifts as well, you can still do the same. In other words, your gifts are not just for your own, for you, or to give you status, or to give you your personal status. They are for restoring people. Okay? You still restore them to their God-given path. So if you think this way, your faith won't be just some separate compartment somewhere that you usually go use them in the church. It becomes now a daily thing. Okay? When you think that way, your faith is not just a separate compartment that can be used in a church or maybe on a Sunday. No. Your work, your family, your social life, all those becomes arenas for restorative partnership with God Himself. And that becomes very powerful. And therefore, I do hope that those who are on one end have seen their practical ways that they can be able to bring themselves to the center. Those who are on this other end, they can bring themselves to the center so that they can join their everyday lives with God's purpose. And we have defined that purpose, and now you can be able to know, how do I connect this? How do I connect myself to this particular purpose? And that becomes very powerful. Now, with that said, let me just go through this quickly because of our time. How does the shift occur in passing the baton to the next generation? Very, very simple things. Number one, the shift occurs by modeling. You model to the next generation. In other words, you're living purpose in your life. It can be seen. You can model it. Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. In other words, they are observing him. So when somebody is observed, when he is living out his purpose, then there is something that gets transferred from that person to the other person, and that's how transfer occurs. Okay, I don't want to belabor on these points. I just want to pass through them. You can go and look for them by your own self. First Thessalonians chapter 2 from verse 8 and 9. Paul is talking about talking to the Thessalonians, and he's telling them, so affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. So it's not just information, me giving you information. It is the impact of our own lives to you. So the first one is the issue of modeling. The second one is the issue of mentoring. That is intentional investment. That's what mentoring is all about. Intentional investment. So we don't mentor people so that they can take over what we have already built, unless they want to. Okay? We mentor them so that they can enter into their purpose. Okay, and that's what we define legacy to be. Okay, so when Paul spoke to Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 2, this is what Paul told Timothy, that the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And right there, you can be able to see 4 generations of the continuum. The things that Paul taught Timothy, Timothy has to teach others, and those ones have to teach others. All right? In other words, you can be able to see the continuum throughout the generations. And that's what Paul was telling Timothy to do. So Timothy did not just continue with what Paul was doing. Paul said, I have finished the race. I have finished my race. Timothy, you don't need to continue doing what I am doing. No, I have given you the values. I've given you the ways. You go find God by yourself. Go continue doing your own purpose in your own generation. He did not give him the structures. No, he didn't do that. And that's what we need to do and need to understand, that it is not passing the structures, it is the values. That's the most important thing. So that the next generation can find their relevance in their own time without necessarily having to carry over the structures that you build. The third thing is the issue of empowering. I'm moving fast because I know of our time. Empowering. In other words, creating space to lead. You create space to lead for others. In other words, empowering means providing guidance and resources and charging people to do the work. All right. So, and David did that for Solomon. Jesus did that to the disciples as well. And that is self-explanatory. The fourth thing I want to talk about is the issue of commissioning. And I really want to explain something here, because in our day, commissioning has become a ceremony, yet it is not. Okay. Commissioning is allowing a person to have, listen to this, imputed value before the public. What is imputed value? Imputed value is the value that something of lesser value gets when it is standing next to something of greater value. For example, if you see me with the president, several times, immediately you start viewing me differently. Why? Because the president has some value before your eyes. So when you see me with him, I get imputed value because of who I am. All right? In other words, it is the passing over of value before the people in public. That's what commissioning is all about. And that does not happen in a ceremony. It happens in the usual normalness of life. All right. In other words, I give you my platform. If I was the one who was speaking, I'll give you a platform for you to speak, and I will introduce you before the people. That's what I'm doing. That's exactly what John the Baptist did. In fact, John the Baptist is the perfect example of somebody who commissioned Jesus. Because remember, John the Baptist, the Bible says that he is the one who came to prepare the way for Jesus. What does it mean to prepare the way? It means John had some value before the people. There's a way they viewed him. They revered him. They knew this is a man sent by God. So whatever John says, they hear. Whatever instruction he gives, they follow. So if then Jesus comes and John introduces him and said, behold the Lamb of God, then the people will follow Jesus, not because he is Jesus. They followed him because John said. Why? Because Jesus got what we call imputed value. All right? And that's what it means to prepare the way for him or to go before him. That's what it means. And that did not just happen in a ceremony. The same case happened with Moses and Joshua. Moses goes to the mountain, Joshua goes with him. Moses goes to the tent of meeting, Joshua goes with him. And people can see that. And along the way, it reaches a place where people start giving him honor and esteem just like they were giving to Moses. That's something that happens over a period of time. So it is not just a ceremony. That's why you cannot commission somebody you don't know. It has to be based on a relationship, and it is important for you to understand that commissioning is another way that values are passed from one generation to the next. And there is a warning I need to just sound here, because if the quest that you have is really to produce people or sons in order to carry on with what you are doing, you end up producing proselytes. There's a difference between sons and proselytes. The Pharisees were the ones who were producing proselytes. And who was a proselyte? A proselyte was a person who was a Gentile who has converted into Judaism. And therefore he becomes a Pharisee. And that's why Jesus told them that when you go through land and sea to go and convert a proselyte, you turn him twice into the son of the devil as you are. In other words, you are turning him or converting him to fit within your system. That's why he becomes twice the Pharisee. And therefore, if then the model is to go recruiting people instead of growing sons organically, you produce proselytes instead of sons. Okay? And that becomes very, very critical. So what are the indicators that the baton has been passed successfully? What are they? How can you tell that it has happened? One, I'm just going to go through them very fast. The next generation owns it. That is ownership. The next generation owns the purpose of God, not your structure, the purpose of God. Meaning wherever they will go, they are still declaring the same thing that you gave to them. They are declaring the purpose of God. So there is ownership. And the next thing is they become innovative in their own way, but they maintain the values. The very things that you taught them, the very thing that they saw you model before them, those ones they maintain. But they are innovating in their own way. They're not necessarily following what you mean your own structure, no, or your own ways of doing things. They're doing things in their own way. They don't necessarily have to follow you. The third thing and the final one is that the current generation falls asleep in peace. Those who are already passing the event, when how you know that the baton has been passed is they fall asleep in peace. Okay, what I mean by that is I'm not talking about death. I'm talking about reaching a place where you're resting. You're no longer moving all over the place. Okay, you reach a place you rest. There is peace in your heart, and that's an indicator. Peace is a great indicator that the baton has been passed. But as long as you're still flying around, you're still moving around, trying to make things work and all that. But I mean, that becomes it means there's no peace, and that's a sad thing. All right, and that is something that you don't even want to find yourself in. That's why Paul said that I have fought a good fight. I've finished my race. I've rested. Now, Timothy, carry on. That's peace. David did the same thing. In fact, David reached a place where the Bible says that he fell asleep. All right? There was peace in his life because something has already been passed. So that becomes the ultimate indicator of the baton that has been passed. We come to the end of our broadcast today. Next week, I'll be talking about issues about dichotomy or dealing with dichotomy. Because that's a huge thing, especially within Christendom, and how we can be able to dismantle that dichotomy and understand that even when we are in the office, when you are doing your business, when you are doing whatever it is that you do, wherever you are, it doesn't matter. You do not necessarily have to be within a one place or location that we call church for you to really serve God. You can serve God wherever you are. And we are going to break that dichotomy and really find out where did that come from and how has it developed over the ages and why we need to dismantle it. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We see you next week. I really appreciate you being here, and you can find these recordings on our YouTube channel, The Song of the Bow, or you can go to Spotify, The Song of the Bow. You'll find all these recordings there so that you can go repeat it. Even this one, please go again and listen to it again and let this thing permeate within your mentality and see how you can be able to change your life, because that's the whole goal or the whole purpose of us sharing this with you. With that, have a good night, have a good morning, have a good day, whatever time that you're listening to this, and see you next week. Bye-bye.